Today we're talking about documentation and deadlines, and both of those integrate with each other, are important for each other. And so, Marques, you had some great anecdotes about why it is so important to document everything. And an example is when you buy a house.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So when you buy a house, you're supposed to receive a binder of all the specs for the home. Maybe the floor plan, the maintenance schedule, and so on. Some people, I'm not going to name anyone on this podcast, has not made that before for their previous homeowners. I'm sorry if you're listening. But you're supposed to do that. And the same works with AV. And the reason is it saves you a lot of time and money on these large AV projects. So when you're dreaming big and you get a $500,000 project, shave a big chunk of that off by documenting well and planning realistic deadlines. So Marques, talk to us about that. Why is that so important?
Yeah. So yes, when I got my house, I did get my binder. So if I need to replace the dishwasher or something's going on, guess what? I go to my binder. I know what it is. I can order parts. AV is not far from that, right?
Okay.
So when we're getting these projects done, these high level projects, you're closing it out. It should just be a process and a standard. For us, it is a process, but for any client out there, you should ask for all the as-built drawings, all the final documentation, any manufacturer warranties, any user guides, and most importantly, all of your files. So DSP files, programming files, all of that should be bundled and turned over. Our view on it is always, it's the client's project, it's their equipment, this belongs to them anyway. And we want to make sure that whether we support them in the future or someone else does, can they have a good baseline? Do they know where to start? Do they know where to look for things? And are they going to be able to support this going forward? Because again, this is a long-term investment. You're spending this much money, $250,000, $500,000 on this project. This is really a long-term investment that you want to see through and make sure it's good to go in 3, 4, 5 years before you have to refresh it. But again, things happen. There's turnover. There are changes in leadership that may lead to changes in manufacturers, their desired or partnerships. As a client, you should still have your binder, right? You should have it electronically, of course. I'm not one for giving people a lot of paper nowadays, but you should still have this binder so that you can go through and say, okay, guys, a new team's coming in. Here's an as-built drawing so you know how this is set up. Because if you don't have those things, in our case, what we do is we'll pre-commission a room. If we're not familiar with it, if we can't find any information on it, we go through, we're pushing all buttons, looking at the cabling, making sure we understand, what's going on. And this is a paid service, because it eats up time and resources. And in a complex space, you may spend almost a day just documenting. So you understand exactly what you're getting into and how to deal with it. So, you're saving yourself some time and some pain down the road by making sure when you're doing a project, you close it out, you have all this documentation.
Yeah. So in the analogy of a home, you're looking for the breaker box and what all is tied to the breaker box, and there's no labels there, or you don't even know where the breaker box is.
Right.
So you're spending time wandering through this house, opening up all the closet doors, trying to figure out what's going on when you could have just gotten to work first hour.
Exactly. Is everything labeled? Is everything there? Do I have the final documents? That's all it is.
Okay. So you mentioned an example is like if there's uncompiled code. If there is a code base to do a lot of this kind of stuff and you can't find it, there's no documentation for it, you got to rewrite it, which of course adds time and money to do that.
Yeah. So either we're rewriting, you may be able to go out to the manufacturer and maybe they have a copy of the code, they can pull it out of the box or some other way. But either way, you're talking about either time or expense or both for something that you should have had from the very beginning. And if you really have a great partner, then they should have a way of tracking that for you. So we have clients, they've called up about systems that may be 3 or 4 years old. They had an internal process change. They were moving more things to in-house support. Cool, sounds great. Said, hey, could you send us the files for these rooms? Absolutely. We just package it up, send them a link. They get access to all their files.
Man, that'd be so helpful. How common is this that either you do or do not have documentation? Because like for me, we were talking earlier, I did not know that people give new home buyers a binder for their house. So I did not keep up with anything. And I didn't receive one, A, on this house, but B, I did not give one because I didn't know that was a thing that people do. So is this common knowledge that people do this? How common is this? I don't know.
I don't want to call it common knowledge. I feel like it's pretty standard. It's a pretty standard thing. Yes, I had a binder. I think my parents have binders, and all the folks I know that bought homes had them.
Okay.
But in terms of AV, It's been a hit or miss for us.
Really?
It just depends. And a lot of it's driven by the individual company and their policies, I suppose, for each integrator. A lot of times you'll see in a large scale project, it's dictated, right? It's in the specifications and the requirements of the project to turn in.
Mm-hmm.
But as we're doing various projects, throughout or outside of a large scale project, for us, again, it's common, but we have taken over several rooms. There's no documentation. Like there's nothing. There's no drawings. We can't get access to code. So we're like, sure, we can still handle it. We can take it over, but it's just going to take some time for us to make sure we understand all the functionality, all the connectivity, what's what. And we've also run into situations where, simple things, right? The bend radius wasn't followed for the cables because there's a complaint about an issue. We're like, oh, the cables are being pinched. We think you're losing signal because of it. So there's a lot that has to happen for us to take over a room when we have, zero materials to start with.
And the details required. I mean, that sounds like a very detailed thing. I mean, I'm thinking there's miles of cables in a lot of your projects.
It can
and you're
be.
talking
It
about
can be.
a corner bend on one of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it causes problems, right? So a lot of times that's what we're looking for. Is everything working, right? If we're going to rip it all out, all right, we're not too worried about it. It'd be nice to know the cable pathways because on occasion, you have a display on the wall. I'm sitting at a desk and I'm thinking conduit goes from the desk to the wall. And I've mentioned this in one of the previous podcasts. There are instances where instead of going, 20 feet from the table to the wall, it's going 100 feet down a hallway, looping, coming back, and then going to the display. Well, you wouldn't know that unless you have the drawings, the electrical drawings, right? So it's just something you have to find out through the process of discovery, which can be painful from time to time.
Expensive from time to time.
And expensive. It's additional cost that you didn't need.
So talk to me about how this impacts deadlines, and we'll segue to kind of the second half of that equation where you've got documentation on front, you're dreaming about a big project, you need to make sure that you have the processes in place at least to start documenting if you don't already have that, and it's, and then you're starting to build out the project file and so on. But then it comes to the deadlines, where is a room finished? And what does that mean that the room is finished and ready? And why that matters, because those two things can be connected. If you have really good documentation or a good process to create that in the project, then presumably you'll have a realistic plan of how you're going to get to a finished room. And that may or may not always happen. But at the point of that being finished, it's very important that you hit your deadlines because...
Yeah. So deadlines are dollars, right? And so, yes, you want your building to open, especially if it's a revenue generating space. It's something for rental, what have you. You're doing events. You need it to open so you can start recouping that cost. There are clauses oftentimes in some of these agreements, some of these projects, liquidated damages. So on the integrator side, all integrators know this and they've seen this before. It means that if you don't finish on time, you are paying someone. You are paying the GC, you're paying the owner. And we've seen fees, $1,500 a day, $2,500 a day. So, right, very important to stay on task. So the documentation up front in the beginning of the project, the specifications, the drawings need to be pretty accurate and match what's actually happening in the building so that you don't run into any kind of delay that is unforeseen or you couldn't have predicted. So as you have those things happening, what are the finishes? What are the materials being used? How high is the ceiling? Like, make sure all that is accurate in the early documentation. And that allows you to stay on schedule for your installation because people don't know and realize, AV is the last trade pretty much going in most of the time. We need a clean environment. What that actually means, there's no more construction happening. Nothing. There's no cutting, no painting, no patching. HVAC is balanced. Everything is done. Because what you don't want to happen is, number one, you don't want anything damaged by another trade. We've done projects where we've had our cables cut multiple times. We've had a display get crushed. We've had all kinds of things happen. And that costs money, right? Someone's paying to replace that stuff or redo the work. But, in addition to that, you just want to make sure that the long-term support is going to be there for the equipment. So when you're doing a new construction project especially, there's a lot of debris and dust that may be in the air as you're balancing HVAC and doing all these things. Well, all of these devices are purpose-built PCs. They have fans. So as they're sucking in air, well, now they're sucking in all this additional debris and this material that may be in the air. So next thing you know, you put up a display and a few devices behind it. You come back the next day, everything's covered in a layer of dust, right? Because you were there too early. And sometimes, we know when we should be in the project and we'll tell folks like, hey, you're not ready for us. And there's often pushback because, AV is not new, but a lot of folks just don't really have a great understanding of what the needs are and what really is happening on the back end with some of this technology. But that's the last thing you would want, is to have an early failure from a box. A manufacturer opens it up and there's just caked on dust and debris, and they said, hey, you're supposed to be operating in a clean environment. This obviously wasn't doing so. Your warranty is voided. Like, that's a real risk of going in too early.
Gosh, we should call this episode Documentation, Deadlines, and Details. These details of getting these things right is so critical. But it's, if I'm the dean of a university or a leader of a hospital or a corporate environment, and I'm thinking about this big project, I would never be thinking about dust in my, projection system, that now the warranty is voided and I got to get a new one or whatever. Like, I would never have that in my mind.
People just don't think about that.
Yeah, so I'm glad professionals who have done this before and lived through those experiences can do this right. Because it's probably sounds like just a small thing, but you do enough of those for a big enough project, and that can get real expensive. I mean, you're talking probably huge percentages of the project budgets go to this kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when we're talking about sensitive pieces of equipment, LED video wall processors or some of the more higher end things. Again, you don't want a failure that could have been avoided, right? You don't want to bring things in early, and yes, someone's going to replace it, but if you can avoid that, you should.
Yeah. And it's a long-term decision as well, like you're saying, like warranty, service, the manufacturer relationship. They kind of, maybe you had a system. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but what comes to mind is like you have a piece or a room or something. It's configured one way, and let's say a year later it doesn't work right. You've got to replace that, but then it means you got to replace 5 other things that connect to it that now are outdated or have changed software or whatever.
That's pretty common. I think every integrator will tell you that they've lived through that experience where, we have interconnected systems, especially when we have, say, a control room environment. You may have 5 learning spaces, high profile spaces. They may pull back to one control room. So yeah, there's no I'm just going to update this one part of it. Well, that part is tied into this other part, so we kind of need to do all these, or you can do some end pieces. Like, yes, updating a display is no big deal. But if I'm updating anything about the control, and I say that no big deal, but I've seen a client update their own displays, and they didn't think about the fact that they went from, say, NEC to LG. Well, guess what? Now your code needs to be updated because the same control language for NEC, those commands don't work on LG. So they got them all changed out, and they're like, hey, can you guys come out? Because none of our displays are working. And as soon as we saw it, we knew what happened. We're like, you can't just change manufacturers. They have different control commands, different language, basically, that's controlling them. So some are similar, but, if you say all within the LG family, maybe, or all within, one manufacturer, but the second you go from one manufacturer to another one, you can't assume, all your code and all your programming is still going to work.
And this is the part of the episode where I say, call Marques early. Call me early.
Just call us early.
If you're about to update all your displays, just give me a call.
And we'll just talk through it, right? We'll just sit and talk like, hey, what do you have planned? What do you want to do? What are you trying to do? And we'll just give you advice sometimes. Like, sure, you could do that. Keep in mind this, and this will be impacted, right? That's just what it is. Or the biggest one is people that want to go to consumer grade displays, and it will immediately get me to shake my head, and any integrator in the space that hears this would shake their head as well. A lot of folks don't realize that maybe it's a majority of consumer grade displays are just going to Best Buy to get some displays. You can't always control them effectively, right? Maybe do some CEC control, but we don't do a lot of that because it's not always the most reliable. It's improved greatly. But, if we want direct feedback, we want to know for a fact something's on or off or the state it's in, that's one of the benefits of using commercial equipment. It works correctly with a control system and is set up for that. So it's, details like that. So we always say, hey, if you want to change it, fine. Let's document it and let me give you some advice about what you should look out for. And then we go from there. But most importantly, please document it. You may come into the room later, like, well, according to the drawing, you should have 5 displays, but I'm in the room right now and I see 10 displays. Something is not right here.
This is the difference between an amateur and a pro. Somebody's done this before. Okay, so talk to me, given the last 5 minutes here, give me some practical advice for somebody who is either starting a project, they're dreaming about it, they got one in mind, or they're let's say a third of the way through and they want to make sure it finishes well, on time, under budget, that kind of thing. Like, what would you say to them, practically speaking? Who should they talk to? What should they be doing right now? What's the takeaway here?
I say number one, have a realistic timeline for when you want to complete your project. And if, say, a new building, when do you want to move in? Are you having a special event? That's one of the things that creeps up all the time. Like, oh, you know what? We're doing a grand opening. Did you tell anyone? Does anyone know? Is it reflected in the scheduling? Because what happens, what I see a lot is that, the general contractor will come out. They'll give you a construction schedule, right? They're making it up. They'll try to reach out when they can. So they'll reach out to various trades to get the information. But oftentimes we'll see something, we'll say, hey, the schedule's not realistic. Like, you've got 42 rooms and you're saying you want to install all the audiovisual systems in 5 days. Could it be done? Yeah, maybe. But you're not really realistic as far as getting it all installed, cables pulled, everything up and running, everything's tested, commissioned, turned over to a client, training. So we see that quite a bit. Or you're not thinking of the fact that, they'll have dependencies and overlaps in the scheduling. It's like, no, you can't do that for AV and technology, right? We need to go in when it's finished. So you can't say, oh, we're dropping in the ceiling and we're going to be painting, but you guys can go ahead and get started installing. No, we can't. AV doesn't come in at that time. We can pull cabling, most likely, but you don't want parts and pieces and devices going into that environment. So I'd say, have an honest conversation about the schedule, make sure there's clarity, bring in your provider, your technology solutions provider, so they can just give you feedback on the timing. Because I think, you don't want to get to the end of the project. Everyone's rushing. Everyone's running. Oh, we have to have our grand opening. It's already scheduled. We have an event. That could have been avoided by having some, clear discussions earlier to make sure everyone's on the same page about what needs to happen, what state the building needs to be in order to complete these systems.
Gosh. Okay. Which, of course, documentation is important to do that.
Documentation.
Okay. And of course, grab a great team that can help you. That's been there a million times. Contact.com. Please go check these guys out. Yeah. Any final words? Any kind of advice for anybody thinking through this, or wisdom? Or you said, I love this line: deadlines are dollars.
Deadlines are dollars.
I love that.
Like I said, it's bringing everyone into the table early. Deep discussions. People always tell us we ask a ton of questions. Yes, we do, because there's a lot going on. We want to make sure we get it right. If you're dealing with a team that's not asking you questions, that would be a point of concern. Do you really understand the project? Do you really grasp what needs to happen and what's going on? So bring folks together early, talk through things, just discuss it early on in the process cycle, and you should be good to go.
Perfect. We'll leave it there. Marques, thank you so much. Again, please get in touch with the team at contek.com, Kontek.com. There's tons of resources there that walk through a lot of these kind of issues that come up during a project, especially if you're in the dreaming phase and you're thinking about this new kind of building or new AV setup that you want to bring your dream to life. But Marques and the rest of the team have been there 100 times, and it's great to have your wisdom and experience as always. And with that, we will see you on the next episode.